It's very easy to get pulled in a million different directions when you go down the path of self-improvement or self-discovery. There are so many of these pathways and so many different people telling you what you should and shouldn't do, and an infinite amount of shiny objects, we'll call them, and distractions that can cause you to become derailed even if you do choose a path. Again, even when you do find a direction, you may notice that it's very difficult to stay focused and consistent in that direction, which of course causes you to stay stuck in place or at whatever level of growth you're currently in. And for some people, it even causes them to go backwards. And so in this video, I want to give you a proven formula that will save you years of trial and error and get you into the fast track to creating the life you want for yourself. This is going to work especially well if you are someone who is freedom oriented and you want more freedom in your life. Freedom of choice, freedom of location, time freedom, energy freedom, financial freedom. If this is something you're looking for, then this formula is going to work so well for you. Now again, what I'm going to share with you in this video is what I have found works incredibly well, not only for myself, by the way, but also for my peers, for my clients. And so I invite you to really utilize this formula rather than trying to guess what works. And again, trying to throw a million things against the wall, hoping that one eventually will stick. Again, you can go that route, and it is the route a lot of people and probably most people go, but it can be quite exhausting, lonely, and quite disheartening, really. The thing is, you don't have to do it that way. You can instead focus on a system or formula that is proven to work and then just apply the system yourself. It's kind of like if you've never lifted weights or gotten fit or anything like that, and you just go to the gym without a plan or without a system from someone who knows what they're talking about, and you just go there and wing it. Well, you're gonna get very spotty results, and maybe after a ton of trial and error, you'll get something that kind of works, but you could also just get a personal trainer, or you could also get someone who gives you a system that you then just apply and then get the results because you're applying a working, proven system. So in this video, I will give you part one of this formula, and then I'm going to link you to another video which goes even deeper, brings everything together, and essentially is going to operate as a part two. Now, I've split these into two videos because it would be incredibly long if I didn't, but if you apply what we go over in this video and then the one I give you at the end of this video, you're gonna have a working formula to essentially, as long as you stick with it, shift your life in basically any direction you want to move it in. Once you have this formula in its entirety, there will be no need to just fumble around in the dark hoping you find your way into the next room, which would represent the next step or level in your journey. Instead, let me light you a candle, a torch, so we can lead you out of the room in the best way possible for you, and so you don't have to just fumble around, feeling around, hoping that you're gonna find the exit. So let's jump into it. Now let me know if this sounds familiar, because this is something a lot of people experience, and it's they start going down a self-improvement journey. They get motivated, they get inspired, they see someone living the life they want to live, or they hear something that genuinely resonates with them and hits home, and they start making some progress, maybe for a week, maybe for two. They're on this motivation, this energy they've acquired from whatever the thing is, and they start making some progress, only for that motivation to just finish and dry up, and then them just to go back to where they currently were. Essentially, it's taking one step forward, but then one step back. And as you continue to take that step forward, it feels like you're making progress, but then you just take that step back into the old story. And so if we were to look at it on a graph, we would see it go like this. And what really, even though it feels like progress each time you take that step forward, you're actually at the same place each time, and it has the illusion of progress. And this is what a lot of people are going through, just taking one step forward on their journey and then one step back. And now we want to get you to the point where you have something that's going to help you take one step forward and then not take the step back, then take another step forward, and again, not take the step back, and then take another step forward. This is why a lot of people feel like they're making some progress, because for a little bit they might be doing things that are genuinely good for them, but then nothing in their life improves. If you want to know if you're making genuine progress, results are always going to be the indicator. You see, the laws and the principles of the universe, of the non-physical that lead to the physical, are immutable. They're absolute. And so they don't make mistakes or try to trick you into being like, is it working or is it not? It will give you very obvious feedback when you recognize what the feedback is. And so if you're doing certain things right, we'll call it, quote unquote right, or you're following following the system, you will absolutely see the evidence of your life changing and some results. If you're not seeing results, it might be time to take a step back, not in that same way of going one step forward and one step back, but to just create this observer effect where you're looking at your life and going, okay, what is it I'm doing that's preventing me from progressing forward? Because if I was progressing forward after enough time, and we'll jump into this, you would start seeing some results. And so the first part of the formula in this video I want to give you is what's called infinite action. And this is something you want to become aware of. And I'm also going to go over ways in which you can apply this to benefit you. And what this means is you are always sending out what we could consider a signal, an energetic signal, or an energetic transference or signature, whatever you want to call it. Now, there is no switching off this signal. You are always giving this off. You are always giving off essentially a sum total of the way you've been thinking, the way you've been feeling, the way you've been acting, speaking, and so on. Basically, the energy of you, however you've been vibrating, is being sent out. Again, there is no asking the universe or God or source to be like, hey, can I switch this off so I can engage in some, let's say, less than positive thoughts or feelings or whatever else. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not bad or wrong necessarily to go on that end of the spectrum. But if you dwell in negativity, if you dwell in negative thinking and feeling and actions, you're going to be sending out that energy and that signature, which you're then going to receive back. But when you remember that you're in infinite action, it gives you an opportunity to take a step back again and observe what it is you're about to do. And ask yourself, is this really the energy, the signal I want to send out there? Now, you are doing this on all planes of your existence. And just to keep it simple, you can think of yourself as a three-part being. One that is, yes, physical. That one's obvious. We're in a physical world. You have a physical body. But you're more than just that. In fact, you're way more than just that. You also have what we could consider a mental side of you and also a spiritual side of you. Mental, just to break this down very simply, you can consider your thoughts, your imaging, your visualizations. Spiritual, you can consider your connection to something larger, your connection to the whole thing, to God, to source, the divinity. You can also consider this your emotional self, because the higher you raise your emotion, the more you're actually connected to the divine and you allow that into your life. Now, emotion, you can also just consider energy in motion. So think of it as your energetic part of you. Now, wherever you are dwelling on these planes of existence is what's sending out the signal that is then being received by the field, by source, whatever you want to call it, and then is determining what is being reflected back into your life. So we want to use this concept of infinite action in our favor so that we are more automatically sending out this signal that is going to benefit us versus harm us. Because if you're sending out a signal, like I mentioned, dwelling in negativity all the time, you're going to receive that back. That's why if you find someone who thinks negatively, feels negatively, and acts negatively the majority of each and every single day, they're very rarely going to be what we could consider successful, happy, fulfilled. They're usually living a life at the very least of quiet desperation, if not worse. They're suffering quite a bit, we can all agree on, right? They're not going to be living the life they want to be living, and they're very far from their dreams or ambitions or whatever it is they wish to create for themselves, or perhaps they're not even able to get that far in thinking what their dreams would even be because they're so absorbed in the suffering or whatever else it is. And so you will never find someone who is that way on all planes of existence who's living in the way that they want. On the opposite end of the spectrum, though, if you met someone or seen someone or been around someone who for the majority of each day dwells in the positive, what we'll consider positive, again, that's a generalization, but thinks positively, feels positively, takes positive actions, you're going to see a very different, again, results and outcome in their life. Their results will be very different. If they want to be thriving financially, they probably are. They're probably incredibly creative in that realm as well. Their relationships are probably very strong and very real. You know, the way they feel in a moment-to-moment way is probably very high on the emotional scale. If we were to put it on the Hawking scale, it would be pretty high on that scale. And because they're feeling this way, they have corresponding results that match that. So how can we, through infinite action, through this principle that we're aware of, that you're always sending out the signal, how can we start to use something that automatically improves your signal? Because believe it or not, you have so many tools available to you in this day and age to help you do this. And it's simple. You see, everything on the planet, everything that you're exposed to has what we could consider an energetic frequency or an energetic transference. Meaning if you expose yourself to something that's vibrating or is energetically at a lower level of consciousness, you will then start to absorb that energy. You will be influenced by it. And one way to really test this out is go into a room with 10 people who are moaners or victim-y or complainers, right? And try and just not get sucked into it. It's very, very difficult. You may before long notice that you're having certain thoughts about what you can victimize yourself about. You may start noticing that you're starting to complain about certain things because the energy in that room is going to be so calibrated to that, right? And so when you consider this, what are some things in your life that you can set up that are at a higher level of energy that then can provide that transference for you that makes it easier for you to also be at that level? So here are some very easy ones, right? Media. Now, media, unfortunately, if you're just going to leave it to its own devices and you're just going to mindlessly scroll media, you're going to most likely be put in a negative place. A lot of media is calibrated at fear, sometimes even guilt and shame, anger, drama, and pride. There's very little that's calibrated at higher levels of consciousness, but it does exist. And so if you seek out media that is calibrated at higher levels of consciousness, and you make sure that when you're consuming media, especially video, movies, songs as well, all of these things, that it's at a higher level of consciousness, you will then be influenced by that. It will influence your energy, your planes of existence, especially that inner plane, which is then going to send out a different signal. However, if you're always scrolling on TikTok and you're always watching, just fear porn, we'll call it, or whatever else, then you're going to have some issues, right? That is going to calibrate you in a very, very different way. And so one thing you can just ask yourself is, what kind of energetic transference, what kind of energetic relationship am I gaining from the things that I'm consuming in my everyday life? The videos you're watching, the movies you're watching, the music you're listening to. Music is a very deceptive one, and one I would definitely look into in what are the lyrics, what is the energy of the music? Again, looking at the Hawkins scale, where would it fall on that scale? And again, music is something sometimes we listen to in the background, it's picked up by the subconscious, the unconscious, and so if it's a lower level of consciousness, that is being programmed into you, into your field, into your energetic makeup, and then that's being sent out. And so can you, and yes you can, but can you start to find different music, different movies, different media that you can consume that would actually improve your energy through consuming it? Essentially, your energetic, mental, and digital environments, you want to calibrate in a way that serve you versus something that harms you. And for most people, they have all of these environments in a way that harms them. Even your physical space, I would recommend you keep organized and you keep clean and everything else, because that will also provide an energetic transference. If you've ever gone to someone's place where it's incredibly cluttered and messy and just in disarray, have you ever noticed that you start to feel almost uncomfortable, a little bit chaotic? Maybe you started overthinking, because that disorderliness is usually a symptom of someone who has a lot of disorder happening energetically or in the inner world. They probably have a mental plane of existence that's not so great, and probably also a spiritual one, or both. Usually it'll be both because there's correspondence. And so that is just an outward manifestation of something that's happening inwardly. And so for your own space, aiming to, again, make it something that feels good, something that has good energy, something that, again, doesn't mean you have to go and get crystals and all this kind of stuff if you're not into that kind of stuff, but just it being clean and orderly and feeling like a space you actually physically want to be in can be very helpful. And so to help with infinite action, just setting up all of your environments to help you to win, making sure what you're consuming is of a higher energy, and this will start to automatically create an energetic makeup that's being sent out that's going to benefit you. Now, a cheat code for this, and it's not like rocket science, is reading really good books. This is one of the best kinds of media that you can consume for many different reasons. Now, books are going to be great because there's going to be less distraction when you're reading a book, and there are more books, I would say, that calibrate at higher levels of consciousness than other forms of media, right? When you find a good book, you are exposing yourself to the energy of the author and the energy it was written in. And so when you read a higher conscious book, you are being immersed in the energy. You're usually only focused on the book. Like if you have your computer open, you might have 3 tabs open and be distracted. You might have your phone near you, being in a conversation. But with a book, you can sit down and for whatever amount of time you read it, not only gain some really good information depending on what you read, but the energetic transfer can be very, very powerful. And so I highly recommend developing some kind of reading habit. It doesn't have to be crazy. You don't need to read an hour a day, even if you read 10 minutes or 5 minutes or a couple pages a day when you don't have as much time, this is going to benefit you because in that time, whatever it is, you're going to be influenced positively through that energy. Again, there are so many amazing books that you can read. Just make sure you're reading, books that are at a higher level of consciousness and they will influence you in that way. So the more you do this through infinite action, through choosing your media more consciously, choosing your information diet, your digital diet, even again, your physical environment more consciously, the more you're going to automatically send out a signal that's going to actually benefit you and help you change things in your physical world. Essentially, it will help you dwell longer in the higher levels of consciousness. And you will notice if you do this, new opportunities in your physical world will start to open up to you because again, as you're at a new level of consciousness, things on that level start to come in all planes of existence, mental, spiritual, and physical. Now, one thing I want to mention that can be very useful here is the idea of karma. Now, I'm going to give you the definition of karma because it's one of the simplest ones I found, and I think it's just an amazing definition of this and how to make it work. Comes from a book called Karmic Management. So if you actually want to use what I just mentioned, reading high conscious material, there's a book you can read. Phenomenal book. But I want to give you the definition that they give for karma. And what they say in the book is karma simply means anything you do, say, or think. And they didn't say this, but I'm going to throw it in there as well, which is feel. Now, if you look at that definition of karma, and then you look at what I'm talking about with infinite action, they're more or less the same. Again, karma is basically what goes around comes around, what you give out, you'll receive back, right? So the way you're thinking, the way you're feeling, the way you're speaking, the way you're acting, essentially, whatever level that is going to come back. This is karma in a nutshell. Essentially, what you do in that realm plants a seed, and that's the seed that's going to grow and then bear fruit. And so if you're planting weed seeds, negativity seeds, that's what's born out of the garden. And if you're planting more positive seeds and fruit seeds, that's what's going to be produced in your life. In fact, in that book, Karmic Management, they say that karma is the cause of all causes, meaning that any cause you see, the underlying cause is karma. Meaning there could be two people who take similar actions or do similar things, and it will be the level of their karma that will determine their results. Meaning it's not necessarily what the thing is, it's going to be the underlying energy. Again, the garden you have cultivated underneath that's going to determine your success or not success. And so I really highly encourage you to prioritize infinite action and to really dwell on this idea and really start applying it in your life. Again, infinite action is happening regardless, but if you do it more consciously and choose things that you actually want in your life to think, feel, say, do, then you're going to see the physical equivalent of those things come in. Now, in part 2 of this formula, like I promised you, you will get some more things that help you to apply infinite action and this karmic principle I just mentioned. But it is crucial to know that this is always occurring. It's never switched off. This isn't a call to become robotic, meaning you have to feel positive all the time, even when you're not. We'll go into that in the next video, but ultimately keep in mind that you are in infinite action. It is just something that is occurring. You are always sending out that signal, and it is determining so much of what's happening in your life. So this next one I think is huge because I believe, at least for myself, one of the best things we can do, or I can do as a coach or a mentor or whatever else, is to simply help people develop the ability to use their own discernment. It's not about me trying to have someone believe what I believe or do what I do to a T or whatever else. It's about helping someone from a higher level of consciousness develop their discernment and intuition so they can make free will choices that lead them down the path they want to go. Now, I'm going to talk about something which I'll just call high conscious discernment, because when you're making choices and you take that step back, you have to recognize what level am I making this choice from? For example, if I'm in fear and then I just go along with that and then make a fear choice, is that really going to lead to the result I'm looking for? Or do I first allow myself to move up that level, up to a higher conscious place, and then make a choice from there? You can even think in your own life, has there ever been a time when a situation has appeared and you were really scared or fearful or worried and then wanted to make some choice from that level and someone talked you out of it and said, hey, just wait a second, calm down, and then you calm down and then you want to make a completely different choice, well, that's a very good strategy, because the choice you'll make from one frequency or energy is going to be very different from the choice or the level of discernment you'll have from a completely different energy. And so if you can continue to raise your consciousness and energy level before making choices and then use your discernment from there, you're going to find that the results improve in your life drastically. Because if you make fear-based choices, you get fear-based results. If you make anger-based choices, you're going to get more anger-based results, and we can use that for any emotion or any level of consciousness. So what I'm saying here, and my invitation here, would be that when you get to a lower level of consciousness, you notice you're in apathy, you're in guilt, you're in shame, you're in anger, you're in fear, as soon as you can, your goal, in my eyes, is to snap yourself out of that, and the priority becomes, what can I do to raise my consciousness before I make a decision or a choice from this place? Now, if you do, don't worry about it. Don't then use that to feel guilty. Again, this isn't about trying to feel positive or be positive or feel great now all of the time, or you're a failure or something like that. It's just about how quickly can you recover? How quickly can you wake up? How good at that skill can you become so that more often you're making these higher conscious choices from a very developed level of discernment. Now, one part of this that goes hand in hand with it is you have to start taking responsibility, and I mean 100% responsibility for your life, your movie, your game, however you want to put it. You are the star of the show. So don't, in my eyes, let any supporting cast try to control it. It is your movie. When you take full responsibility for it, you step fully into your power. And before you take 100% responsibility for your life, you're always going to be sending out somewhat of a victimhood level signal, which again is just going to lead to victimhood level results in your life. But if you take 100% responsibility for your life, you take full responsibility for the way you feel, the way you think, the things you do, the way you speak, well then suddenly you're gaining all that power back rather than giving it to all these things outside of you to make you feel bad or to make you think in a certain way or whatever it is that you like, right? When you take 100% responsibility, things in your life are going to dramatically change, because that's a great way to take your power back. These are my choices. I have the free will to choose these things, and then it's not up to someone else to come in and change your life. Ultimately, when you blame others or outside circumstances, you give your power away. You essentially give things outside of you the ability to influence your reality. And normally things outside of you do not have the ability to control your life or your reality, but they will if you give them permission to do so. So something that's going to be crucial in my eyes if you want to live a freedom-based lifestyle, if you want to be someone who's responsible for your life and therefore gets to choose what you're going to create in your life, there is a practice called shadow work that I highly recommend that you start doing if you haven't already. And shadow work is essentially letting go, it's surrendering, it's doing these kinds of techniques. I've gone over them and I'll provide some resources to help you with this. But when you're holding on to certain things in your field, in your body, wherever else, this gets kind of put into your energetic makeup that's sending out that infinite action signal that we went over earlier. This is what causes you to get triggered. So maybe you are feeling pretty good, you're being pretty positive, but then you get sucked back in to an energy you would rather not dwell in. Well, the reason for that is because it's still in your energetic makeup. It's still there. It's still something that can affect you and draw you in certain directions, and again, is sending out that signal. And so through shadow work, we either integrate or release these energies so that the thing that's causing the trigger, the charge that's there, that's causing you to lower your consciousness in that moment, no longer can affect you, and it's gone. You see, if you have anchors that are holding you down in water, we'll say, and up towards the surface is the higher levels of consciousness, the way to raise your consciousness is to release the anchors. Not try and swim upstream, not necessarily try and add anything at that point, although that can be useful to a certain degree. But one of the things that's going to give you, biggest bang for your buck, that's going to give you the most growth, is releasing the things that are literally pulling you down or keeping you in place. When you do this, it improves everything in your life, and I mean everything. Things in your outer world will start to change, because again, when you do this, your energetic makeup completely changes, because that thing that was a part of that makeup that was most likely more negative or more dense or more heavy has been released. It's not there anymore. And so you're sending out a completely different signal now. Pretty much everyone I've met who is living a freedom-based life, a life on their terms where they're happy, fulfilled, wealthy, abundant, all of these different things, has done shadow work to a very high degree and still does it, right? They still do shadow work in one form or another all of the time. Again, these people don't want any constricting, suffocating weeds in their inner garden. And they recognize that if they do not uproot those weeds, if they do not remove them, release them from the garden, it will strangle the things they are trying to build in the inner world, which will lead to the results in the outer world. And as you start doing the shadow work, the good news is as you start clearing out what might be a lot of weeds in the garden, then it becomes a lot easier because as you plant what you want and they start growing, you'll notice if a tiny weed pops up and it'll be a lot easier to uproot. But again, if you have a garden covered in weeds and you try to plant seeds, what's going to happen? It will not grow. In fact, if you keep the weeds there, they will continue to proliferate. More problems will become abundant. You'll have an abundant garden of weeds and things that are holding you back. And so shadow work is the equivalent of de-weeding, of uprooting these weeds instead of ignoring them and pretending they don't exist. Again, this will truly start to free you and lead to results that reflect that. It truly allows you to connect more to what you actually are when you remove these anchors that are, again, preventing you from rising to that place. Okay, so now with all of this in place, as you start doing what we've already talked about in this video, the infinite actions, setting up your environment, shadow work, and everything else, we're going to do something called follow the universal or inner GPS. You see, a certain inner knowing is going to start becoming activated within you. Now, if you have a ton of weeds in the garden, or you're not using your discernment from a higher level of consciousness, or you're just being distracted by lower conscious media and you're in a really bad environment, the opening for these knowings, this intuition to come in is so constricted that you probably won't notice it. But as we clear the weeds, as we fix up your environment, as you start sending out a more clear, clean signal, you start getting a more clear, clean signal back that is going to start encouraging you to move and do certain things in a particular way. Now, this is where trial and error starts to become a thing of the past. Because before, if we're all gunked up and we're only trying to overthink our way to success, again, what we aim to do is throw a million things at the wall and hope something that sticks. And something may stick eventually, but it's going to take a ton of time, a ton of energy, and guess what? If you get really good at just throwing a million things at the wall and having something stick, that's what you'll have to keep doing because that's what you're getting good at. However, if you clean up the gunk, you heighten your intuition, you essentially have an inner GPS that tells you when to go left or right or straight, you're going to throw one thing against the wall, maybe two things until you get really good at it, and it's going to stick. It's kind of like, again, being in a dark room and there's no light. And for you to move in the direction you want to move in your life, you need to find your way into the next room, but there's just no light and you have no idea where that door is. And there's all of these obstacles and things you're fumbling around in. And, you know, if you're in there for a very long time, you might eventually find your way out, but maybe you won't. Maybe you'll give up and just sit down and just be like, you know what, I'll just keep, this room will be fine. Following this GPS, this inner knowing, and really calibrating that is almost as if a light on the floor lights up and just leads you on the way to the door to the next room. And it lights up and shows you to go right and you just follow it and then you go left and then you go straight and you go around this thing and there's the door. Whereas if you just try to, again, trial and error your way there, you may never find it, or if you do, it's going to be exhausting. And again, you haven't learned anything or gotten any better at doing it in this different way. You'll just have to do exactly the same thing in the next room. Now recognize this is a very different way of moving. This is not an analytical way of moving, which is more around throwing things against the wall until things stick. Again, an inner knowing is not going to justify itself or try to tell you every reason why it's taking you in a certain direction. This is where trust has to come into play. But again, if you've cleared out the inner garden of the weeds, if you are now being influenced by higher levels of consciousness and you're sending out a much more clean signal, what you're going to get back is going to be much more accurate and much more benevolent, loving, and actually guide you in the right direction. And therefore, it's just going to tell you, hey, go left, or go right, or go back, or go straight, or wherever it's going to tell you to go next, but it's not going to tell you how or why or any of that. It's just going to say yes or no, green light or red light. It is not going to give you a pros and cons list. It is not going to overthink it. It is just going to pull you in a certain direction or repel you from a certain direction as well. Now, we've all experienced this to some degree in our life. You know, you went to make a decision and let's say you got like this huge contraction, constriction in your gut that just told you something's off about that. Or maybe there was something that was so exciting and felt so light. And then more times than not, people don't take that action because they talk themselves out of it or allow someone else to talk themselves out of it. Well, that's not realistic. You know, you have this to think about. That's not a pathway most people go down, whatever else it is. Again, this GPS, this inner knowing does not care about all of the analysis. It's just going to tell you where to go based on what's going to be best for you. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, again, you want to be in a higher level of consciousness when you tune into this. Because if you're in fear and then the fear is giving you a yes in a certain direction, you know, again, this is not going to be taking you necessarily where you want to go. It may just be something that's aligned to fear. But if you're in joy, excitement, and love, and then something is light and pulling you in a certain direction, then it's something that's going to help you continually experience that at higher levels, most likely. And it actually gets almost a little spooky in a good way when you get good at this, because you just start following this system and following this intuition, and good things just start to happen. Even though everyone else, again, just look at how most people are living and the results they're getting, and then ask yourself if that's what you also want. If not, then maybe you shouldn't be taking the advice of them if they're living a fear-based life, or they gave up on the thing they wanted to do to be practical, but it's made them miserable, right? Or whatever else it is. Ultimately, if you follow this, it gets almost just spooky what starts to come into your life out of left field. Things will begin to change because now you're suddenly on a different frequency, moving in a different direction that's actually connected to this deeper part of yourself. Now, what makes this even more powerful is when you have a direction you've set in place from a higher conscious level. When you have essentially something that you can plug into the GPS and then it's going to show you how to get there. Now, I mentioned that this is part one of part two because part two is going to show you how exactly to do that and how most successful people, people who have really utilized these universal principles and laws to achieve amazing things, fulfillment and success in many different ways, this is what they're doing. And so I'm going to show you how to do that in part two of this formula. If you use what we went over today in really clearing yourself out, calibrating yourself at that level, getting that inner knowing calibrated, and then set a direction, which is the final component that we're going to go over here, then you're going to be flying and you're going to have a full system that's going to lead you to where it is you want to go.